So, you listened to last week's episode, and maybe you cried. Maybe you sat in your car in the parking lot and let it hit you. Maybe you sent it to your best friend with a text that said, "This is literally us." Maybe you're still processing. Whatever happened after you pressed stop on that episode, I want you to know something. That was the beginning, not the end. Because here's what nobody tells you about awareness. Seeing the pattern doesn't make it disappear. Naming the wound doesn't instantly heal it. You don't listen to one podcast episode about trauma responses and wake up a new woman on Monday morning. And if you're sitting here right now feeling like, okay, I see it now, but what do I actually do with this information? This episode is for you. Today on Glow and Flow Radio, we're talking about what healing actually looks like. The real version, not the Instagram version, not the I did the work and now I'm unbothered version, but the messy, nonlinear, sometimes ugly, always worth it version that nobody is posting about. Welcome back to Glow and Flow Radio. I'm your host, Delicia, also known as Dee Dee. And if you're new here, first of all, welcome. But I'm going to strongly recommend you go back and listen to last week's episode first. It's called Trauma Responses You Think Are Personality Traits. And it's the foundation for everything we're going to talk about today. In that episode, we talked about 5 behaviors most of us have claimed as part of our identity: people pleasing, hypervigilance, emotional eating, overworking, and difficulty saying no, and how each one is actually a survival strategy our nervous system developed to keep us safe. And if you picked up the companion guide and took the assessment, Am I Healing or Performing, that goes with that episode, you might be sitting with some big feelings right now. Maybe relief, maybe sadness, maybe a strange combination of both. Here's the thing. After we become aware of our patterns, there's a question that almost always comes next, and it sounds like this. I see it now. I see all 5 of those patterns in my life. I've been seeing things for years. I've read books. I've done the journaling, and I'm still people pleasing. I'm still emotionally eating. I'm still saying yes when I mean no. So what am I doing wrong? And that question, what am I doing wrong, is exactly where we need to start. Because the answer might surprise you. Nothing. You are doing nothing wrong. The problem isn't you. The problem is what you've been told healing is supposed to look like. We live in a culture that has turned healing into a performance. And I need us to talk about that before we go any further. Open your phone right now. Go to Instagram, TikTok, wherever you spend your time. Search healing journey. What do you see? Beautiful women in white linen on the beach journaling at sunrise with a matcha latte. Transformation photos, maybe. Or even before and after bodies. Captions about how they did the inner work and now they're thriving, unbothered, glowing, fully healed. And it looks aspirational. It looks clean. It looks like a destination you arrive at if you just do enough therapy, read enough books, meditate enough mornings. But that is not healing. That is a highlight reel of healing. And it is doing real damage to women who are in the middle of their process, wondering why their version doesn't look like that. So let me be really clear about what healing is not. Healing is not linear. It does not go from broken to fixed in a straight line. You will have a breakthrough on Tuesday and a breakdown on Thursday. You may go weeks without emotionally eating and then find yourself standing in front of the refrigerator at 11 p.m. after a hard day. That is not failure. That is process. Healing is not the absence of struggle. You don't heal and then never feel triggered again. You don't heal and then never people please again. Right? Healing means the space between the trigger and your response gets wider. It means you catch yourself sooner. It means you choose differently more often, not perfectly, not always, but more often. It's like when you have a breakup and initially everything is triggering. You hear a song on the radio, you see a couple walking seemingly very much in love, perfect the picture of a perfect relationship. And it's triggering. You're raw when you initially go through that breakup. But then the healing process starts. And the point between the triggering event, seeing that couple, hearing the song on the radio, it becomes less and less triggering. Doesn't mean you won't ever be triggered again, but as more time passes and you're going through the healing process, you can see couples together and you may be unbothered. It's less triggering, right? Or you hear that song on the radio or any love songs on the radio, and they're not evoking a negative response because you're healing. Again, that doesn't mean that you will never be triggered again. But I'm using that example to show that healing doesn't mean the absence of struggle. Again, healing means the space between the trigger, that song on the radio, and your response, maybe getting emotional, gets wider. You may hear that song and not even think about that person at some point in time. But you have to get there. Healing also is not a performance. You don't need to document it. Not that documenting it can't help, but you don't have to do that. You do not need to post about it. Please don't do that. You do not need to prove to anyone, including yourself, that you're doing it right. If your healing looks like crying in the shower, that counts. And that's a healthy thing also. I have done that. I went through a breakup that was very difficult. And I found myself crying in the shower. And I allowed myself to experience those emotions. I didn't chastise myself for crying or feeling the hurt because it was painful. And we're human, and that's okay. We go through emotions, and you have to allow yourself to release those feelings, that sadness. You can't just hold it inside. Holding it inside is not healthy. Maybe your shower is a safe space for you to release those emotions. If your healing looks like going to bed at 8 p.m. because you're emotionally exhausted, that counts. If your healing looks like nothing changed on the outside, but everything shifted on the inside, that counts. You may have gone through a transformation that no one else has seen yet, or they may never see because it's not for them, it's for you and how you move forward. And a lot of transformation is not visible to the naked eye. It may be visible in how you move differently, how you think differently, what you're willing to accept going forward, the boundaries you set. But it may not be a physical transformation. For some, it is. But for others, it is something internal, or it's a combination of the two. But again, healing is not performative. Healing also is not about becoming a different person. This one is really important. You are not trying to kill the version of you that coped through food or people pleasing or overworking. You are trying to understand her, love her, and gently show her that she has other options now. Such as with emotional eating, you have other options. After you recognize the emotional eating cycle and what is triggering it, you can find other options that work for you. And as I've said in previous episodes, what works for one person may not work for another. That's why I stress finding alternative options that will work for you. But the key thing is to recognize it. What's driving the emotional eating? So if you've been measuring your progress, against someone else's highlight reel and coming up short, I need you to release that right now. We're not in the game of comparing ourselves anymore. We're past that. It's sort of like when people post these beautiful pictures on the internet, on Facebook, on Instagram, making their life look spectacular, and you're wondering, why can't I have that? They may not have it either. Any of us can go and post a beautiful picture. You can do that today. There have been people who have been caught up renting, and I don't even know what it's called, but I've seen it where you can rent, like, it looks like you're on a private jet, but it's not even the full jet. You're just sitting in this shell that looks nice, and this person looks like they're traveling and in a private jet, but in actuality, they are not. But they want you to believe that. And that's where, social media can become harmful because we buy into those lies. I'm not saying it's 100% lies, but people aren't generally posting the difficult moments, the real online. They want to post the things that make them look, in their mind, better, like they've got it all figured out. And I know people who do that regularly. And trust me, knowing them, I know that they don't have it all figured out. And that is okay because we're all in different stages of life trying to figure things out along our journey. And that's fine. So, again, do not measure your progress against someone else's. I need you to release that, truly release it now. Your healing does not need to be pretty to be real. It just needs to be yours. Now, I want to talk about something that almost never gets discussed in wellness spaces. And it's the reason a lot of women stall out after their big awareness moment: grief. When you realize that people pleasing isn't your personality, it's a trauma response. There's a moment of relief. Oh, that's why I do that, right? But right behind that relief, there's grief. Because now you're looking at decades, potentially, of your life through a new lens. All those times when you said yes when you wanted to say no. All those relationships where you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. All those years you spent at war with your body because no one told you that emotional eating was a trauma response and not a character flaw. And I want to pause here for a moment and speak on that last part, because I heard something recently, and I don't like to call out names unless I absolutely have to, but there's a couple of, pretty famous, prominent people who recently made the comment, we need to bring fat shaming back. And I totally disagree with that. I don't think fat shaming has ever worked in the history of obesity. You can't shame someone into them losing weight. Not as a permanent fix, right? So with fat shaming, it only perpetuates the emotional eating cycle, because part of the emotional eating cycle is shame. Now, I'm not saying everyone who emotionally eats is overweight or obese. That's not the case. But for many of us, it is the case. And so you're going through that emotional eating cycle, you already feel the shame behind it. Well, having someone else pile that more shame upon you isn't going to do much good. It's actually going to make things worse, because you eat to deal with the guilt and the shame, and the cycle just continues. I have episodes where I go into more detail on the emotional eating cycle. I won't do that here to belabor things, but I just wanted to touch upon that particular. It's not a character flaw. It's not something that you should be shamed for. It's not going to help to shame someone because they're overweight or they're emotionally eating and it may be causing weight gain. Please don't do that. I know some people may mean well by doing that, but it absolutely does not help, and it can make things much, much worse. If body shaming helped, we wouldn't have an obesity epidemic today, because I will tell you, people may think, oh, well, we have more obese people today. So back in the 80s and 70s, 80s, maybe early 90s, yeah, we had fat shaming. So now that we are in this body positivity time, we have more obese people. We need to bring fat shaming back. I think they're drawing the wrong correlation. I think things have become easier as far as, more processed food, fast food, the way processed food is developed now, the chemicals that are in processed food that can lead to um, chemical responses in the body that uh, can make I'll 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 put it like this: it can trigger more cravings. Um, and the fake sugars, you can look all that up. There's fake sugars that causes problems within the body that does not help with obesity and can actually keep people in that obesity category. But that's a topic for a different day. There's much information out there, and I encourage you to read it. But, it's basically, it boils down to, you know, there are other factors at play. People back then, there was more home cooked meals. Now people are so busy, they're getting these fast food meals, these quick meals that they can go in, processed foods. They're not making things from scratch with natural ingredients like they did back in the day. Now there's so many chemicals in the food that can disrupt your body's natural processes and lead to other issues, one of them being obesity. And again, I'm not going to harp on that, but there's a lot of things that we consume today that causes problems within our bodies that weren't consumed back then, that causes more inflammation within our bodies. But there's a lot of good detailed information out there. And again, I don't want to beat that horse in this episode, for lack of a better way of putting it. But just know that it's not a character flaw. It's not anything that you need to feel shameful of. It's just something that we need to, first of all, recognize what's driving our emotional eating, and figure out ways to navigate that and what we're going to do about it. It doesn't mean that you'll never emotionally eat again, but finding other ways to navigate emotional eating cycle, and finding that you have other options definitely help. And if your goal is to lose weight, for everyone that is not their goal, and I'm not saying that you have to lose weight if you are overweight. That is your decision. It is highly personal for you. But if you do want to lose weight, then finding other ways to deal with your emotional trauma aside from eating your feelings, there are other methods and options out there for you. But again, I am not saying that, and I'm not going to ever say that you have to lose weight. There are pros to it, but again, we won't get into that into this episode. That's for episodes down the line. But don't feel bad. It's only going to make things worse. And if you go back to some of the prior episodes, it kind of explains in more detail the emotional eating cycle and how and why it happens. So I would encourage you to go back to some of the earlier episodes and check those out. And again, in future episodes, we will touch upon other ways of dealing with emotional eating. If you would like to work on your weight, there'll be information for that coming in later episodes. But if you don't, again, that's fine. That is highly personal, and there is no judgment here. I'm not going to say that there aren't people passing judgment out there There'll always be, always have been, but it is about you and what you want to do. I'm not going to judge you either way, and we shouldn't. There are people in the body positivity movement who would have gone on record criticizing people for not wanting to have a piece of cake. Now, if we're not going to shame people for eating the cake, we also can't shame people for not eating the cake. So it's highly personal to that person. And people have to be in a space to be ready. Not everyone is in a space to be ready to embark upon a, weight loss journey. And that is okay. It takes time. And if you're happy and healthy, then do you, boo. But we're not going to judge either way, not on this podcast. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to help you navigate your depression, your anxiety at a Glow and Flow Holistics, and your emotional eating, which a lot of times your trauma, depression, anxiety, stress response is related to emotional eating, and emotional eating can lead to weight gain. But again, we're not going to get into the whole yo-yo dieting, diet culture type thing. We're looking for real healing, and it starts by dealing with the trigger, and recognizing, learning about the emotional eating, what triggers it, what can we do differently, removing the guilt and the shame that perpetuates the cycle. So no, I don't agree with fat shaming people. I don't agree with shaming people on either side. Whoever is listening right now, it is highly personal for you. You are the only person who can make those decisions. What I'm here to do is guide you either way, support you, provide information. Okay, I'm going to move on, but I just, that just stopping there and realizing that was recently something that came up in, you can say, the news on YouTube. People talking about, bringing fat shaming back. And I'm like, that's ridiculous and very harmful. So please, don't do that. If you're thinking that will be helpful for someone, please don't do that. Read up on the emotional eating cycle before you traumatize someone with that further. And because they're probably already dealing with trauma and you're just going to add to that. But I know that's a lot to process. And I said a lot in a lot of information in a very short period of time here. And again, there will be episodes coming that will go into more detail about the processed foods and how it impacts our bodies and things of that nature, because even the seed oils, all of that, I want to get into all of that in later episodes, because right now what we're doing is the foundational work, the recognition of what the issue is, and finding other ways to navigate it, right? But I recognize that this is a lot of information to process, and I know it can feel overwhelming. And you might even grieve the years that you feel that you've lost, not knowing the time you can't get back. the version of yourself that might have existed if someone had told you sooner. You might grieve the relationships, the people who benefited from your people pleasing and who might not stick around when you start having boundaries. And if you have people who leave you or gravitate away from you because you start having boundaries whereas you didn't have boundaries before, then those people weren't your people in the first place. They weren't your friend. They don't really care. And that's not a loss. Losing people who don't care about you, truly care about you, is not a loss. It may be a loss for them because they lost someone who truly cared about them, but them walking away because you finally say no or you set a boundary, that's not a loss. And again, you have to do what's best for you. Not what's best for them, not what's best for your spouse or your parent or whoever, your coworker. No, what's best for you. And it's not about being selfish. So get that out of your mind. It is not selfish to take care of you. What's selfish is for other people to expect for you to bend to their will just because it's what they want from you, what they expect from you, how they want to live vicariously through you in some cases. And when I say that, I'm speaking of parents who place requirements, stipulations on their children, their expectations of what they want for your life. And you're constantly trying to live up to those expectations. No. What do you want? Because these years go by fast. Some of us don't even make it to retirement. I've seen it happen many times over. So what do you want to do? What will make you happy? What drives your passions? Your creativity? And I know I'm going down another rabbit hole, but when I think about people pleasing and setting boundaries and people, walking away from you when you set boundaries or when you say no and you're not the pushover that they want and expect you to be, I just want you to recognize that that is not a loss for you. You might even grieve the simplicity because before you saw the patterns, you could just call yourself a perfectionist and keep going, overworking yourself, driving yourself into the ground. Oh, I'm a perfectionist. Now you just can't unsee it. And unseeing would be so much easier, I know. Because when you recognize what's going on, your patterns, why you're doing or why you react the way you do, why you make certain decisions, you can't unsee it. And now you have to either go through life recognizing those patterns and being okay with being manipulated, being a pushover, or you do the work. You do the work to heal. You go through the grief. And then you begin that work. But here's what I want to tell you about grief, sis. It is not a sign that something is going wrong. It is a sign that something is going right. You are mourning a life that was built on survival. And that mourning is what makes space for a life built on intention. But you have to let yourself feel it. Again, cry in the shower. Feel the grief. Let it out. It's okay. You cannot heal what you refuse to grieve. It just You're just holding it inside. It's just inside you, dormant or not dormant. It'll come out in other ways, but it's going to come out. But at least if you're actively healing, you have some control, right? And this is the part where a lot of us reach for food when we're, going through that grief process. Not because we're weak, because grief is one of the hardest emotions to sit with. And we were never taught how. I know this space. I have lived this space. Standing in my kitchen late at night, eating something I wasn't even hungry for, truly. Trying to swallow down a sadness I couldn't name. Or maybe I could name it, but, you know, at that moment, that food provided a temporary relief, a temporary dopamine hit. But that was grief. I just didn't know it yet. Let it be here. It won't stay forever, but it needs to move through you before it can move out. And that's something I learned later in life. You have to go through the feelings. And it's people who stay in bad jobs, or I should say toxic job environments, poor relationships, because they see it as easier than going through the process of the grief, the difficulties of leaving that working relationship or that intimate relationship. It's easier for some to just stay with the person who's causing them the pain because it hurts so much in the beginning. I know I've been through it more than once. But I can tell you from experience, if you go through that process, if you allow yourself to feel those hurt feelings, the grief, the sadness, you'll come out better on the other side. You'll see things so much more clearly. And you'll have a better understanding of what you should and should not accept. Okay, so we've talked about what healing is not. We've talked about the grief. Now let's talk about what healing actually looks like in your daily life. Because I promise you, it's happening even when you can't see it. Here are 5 real signs of healing, no highlight reel required. Sign number 1, you catch yourself mid-pattern. You're about to say yes to something you don't want to do. And this time you notice. You feel the tightness in your chest. You hear the automatic "of course" forming in your mouth. And even if you still say yes, even if you don't change the behavior yet, the noticing is the healing. So it starts with education, then recognition, and then from that point, it continues on into changes. Before you said yes on autopilot, now there's a pause. Even if half a second, that half second is everything. That is your awareness muscle getting stronger. You're building up that awareness, that recognition of the issue. That is the space between the trigger and the response expanding. Healing is not, I never people please anymore. Healing is, I caught myself people pleasing and I chose to be gentle with myself about it. And eventually you may move on to a space where you are not doing so much people pleasing. And there's ways to say no, whether it's on the job, in your personal life, there are ways to say no. And the people who truly care about you will not begrudge you for saying no. Because you're your own person and you have that right to say no. If they truly love and respect you, that will be okay. If they don't, you'll see it, and then you again can't unsee it, and you'll have to move accordingly. Sign number 2, you feel worse before you feel better. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but this one is one of the most important things I can tell you. When you start healing, you often feel more, not less, because you're removing the coping mechanisms that were numbing you. If emotional eating was your way of not feeling the grief, and you start eating more intentionally, guess what surfaces? The grief. If overworking was your way of avoiding loneliness and you start resting, guess what's waiting? The loneliness. This is the part where so many women think they're getting worse and they quit. They go back to the old patterns, old relationships, because at least those patterns and those relationships were familiar. At least they knew how to function inside of them. But you're not getting worse. You're finally feeling what was always there. The pain didn't appear because you started healing. It appeared because you stopped hiding from it. And that takes more courage than anything the wellness industry will ever celebrate. Sign number 3, your relationships start to shift. When you start healing your people pleasing, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will notice. When you start saying no, someone is going to be surprised. When you stop overworking to prove your worth, someone might even question your dedication. This is the most uncomfortable part of healing, and no one prepares you for it. Some relationships will deepen. The people who genuinely love you will adjust. They might be confused at first, but they'll respect the new you. But some relationships will fall away because they were built on your trauma response, not on mutual respect. And that loss is real. It hurts. But a relationship that requires you to abandon yourself to maintain it is not a relationship. It's an arrangement, and a one-sided one at that. And you deserve more than arrangements. That's what it all boils down to. You deserve more. And I'm not trying to minimize the loss that you'll feel and the pain from losing that person or those persons. I get it. But in the end, it's more of a loss for them than you. And you'll recognize that because you'll start to recognize that you deserve more than you were getting. You'll see how one-sided things were. And you'll be able to move forward, not accepting that type of treatment again. Now, sign number 4, you start having new conversations with food. This one is specific to our community, so stay with me. Healing your trauma responses changes your relationship with food. Not overnight, not perfectly, but gradually. Remember, I said you have to find out what is triggering your emotional eating. It has to start there. A lot of diet culture will tell you, oh, you just need to eat less, move more. You just need to follow this plan, that plan, and you'll lose weight. And for, yeah, it will work for the short term for many. But unless you deal with what is triggering you to eat the way you eat and how much you eat, if you don't deal with the root cause, the weight will come back. But you can heal that relationship with food. You might notice that when you reach for food, that you begin to pause to ask, what am I actually feeling right now? You might not have the answer, and that's fine too. The question is the breakthrough at that moment. You might notice that you eat the thing, the chips, ice cream, whatever it is, and instead of spiraling into shame afterwards, you just notice, I ate because I was lonely. I ate because I was sad. No judgment, no punishment, just observation. You might notice that food starts to lose its power as the only source of comfort in your life, because you recognize the trigger and you find other options, other ways of dealing with it, with that sadness, that loneliness, the depression, the anxiety. Not because you restricted it, but because you started building other sources of comfort. So you're your food, you notice food starts to lose the power, not because of restriction. I'm trying to say it a different way. But because you found other ways to comfort yourself. Rest, boundaries, connection, creativity, a myriad of other options are available. The things food was standing in for all along. This is not about willpower. This is about expanding your emotional toolkit so that food doesn't have to carry the whole load by itself. Again, it doesn't mean you will never emotionally eat again. It just means that that will not be your first go-to as you go through your healing journey. You'll learn over time other ways to feel that comfort. Sign number 5, you develop compassion for the version of you that survived. This is the deepest sign. And for many of us, it's the last one to arrive. For years, you may have been angry at yourself, frustrated with yourself, ashamed of the emotional eating, the people pleasing, the inability to rest. You treated those parts of yourself as enemies to defeat. Healing is when you can look at those parts and say, thank you. You kept me alive. You did the best you could with what you had, and I'm going to take it from here. Not dismissing them, not pretending they don't still show up, but meeting them with gratitude instead of shame. That shift from shame to compassion is not a small thing. It is the entire foundation of lasting change. That is why it is important to be compassionate with yourself. And if you're not there yet, that is completely okay. That kind of compassion doesn't come from a decision. It comes from practice over time. Slow, imperfect, repeated practice. It's sort of like when you're getting those negative thoughts in your head, those shame thoughts, those feelings of shame. You have to actively redirect your mind away from those negative thoughts, negative patterns. Now, I want to normalize something before we close out. Most of your healing journey will not feel like a breakthrough. Most of it will feel like Tuesday. You'll go to work, you'll cook dinner, you'll deal with the same people and the same stressors. And healing will be this quiet thing happening underneath it all. It's choosing to pause before you say yes. It's noticing the urge to eat and sitting with it for 60 seconds before deciding. It's going to bed instead of answering one more email. It's texting a friend when you're sad instead of opening the pantry. These are not dramatic transformations. They're micro choices, and they add up. They compound. One day you'll look back and realize you're living a completely different life. Not because you had one big moment of change, but because you made 1,000 small ones. The messy middle is where the real healing lives. Not in the before, not in the after, in the during, in the ordinary, unremarkable, unglamorous during. And if that's where you are right now in the middle, wondering if it's working, unsure if you're doing it right, let me be your mirror for a second. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. And the fact that you're here, listening, showing up, asking the hard questions, that is not nothing. That is everything. I created something to support you through this part of the journey. It's called the My Healing is Not Performing 7-Day Check-In Journal. Excuse me. It's not a gratitude journal. It's not a habit tracker. It's 7 days of honest questions to help you notice what's shifting. Without judgment, without performance, without trying to prove anything. Each day has one reflection question, one body check-in, and one compassion prompt. It takes about 5 minutes and it's completely free. You can grab it at glowandflowholistics.com or you can click the link in the show notes. And if you grabbed the Am I Healing or Performing self-assessment from last episode, this journal is the perfect next step. The self-assessment helped you see the patterns. The journal helps you start living differently inside them. I want to leave you with this. You do not need to be healed to be whole. You are whole right now, in the mess, in the grief, in the moment where you catch yourself people-pleasing and choose to be kind to yourself about it instead of adding it to the shame pile. Healing is not a destination. It is how you walk, how you go through life. And you, sis, are walking, even when it doesn't feel like it. On the next episode, we're continuing this series. I'm going to get into the practical side, actual tools and daily practices for rewiring those trauma responses. Not theory, not concepts, things you can do today. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Until then, keep glowing, keep flowing, and keep healing from the inside out. This is Glow and Flow Radio, and we'll see you in the next episode.